Alrighty, so this is a recording of class from Wednesday, September 30th, 2020. So today in class, we talked about how the quiz on Friday, the 2nd of October, will be about 9 questions, 26 points. It's going to go over density calculations. So that's like calculate mass, volume, density, that kind of thing. And then also density concepts. So stuff like, does this sink or float? All that good noise. And you want to make sure you don't forget your units and your sig figs while you are taking this quiz. So we just did some practice problems kind of involving that. So this is one thing we started off with was like, okay, so we had this graduated cylinder. I poured 4 different liquids into this graduated cylinder. Their densities are listed up here. So what must be the density of the blue liquid? Like, well, the blue liquid must be the most dense because it sank to the bottom. So that means it has to be the 1.67. And then we kind of moved our way up through this. We're like, okay, 1.10 must be next, then 0.92. Then finally, the least dense, 0.76, must be the density of the red. Another follow-up question I asked people for this was, I'm like, okay, which one of these colors is water? So I asked people, like, okay, so blue, green, yellow, or red, which one is water? And this is a trick question because if you think about it, water's density is 1.00. None of these have a density of 1.00, so that means none of these are water. So I was kind of double checking to see, number one, if you knew the density of water, and number two, if you could compare that to these and be like, okay, water must not be in here. It's a trick question. So the answer to that was none. And lastly, I have this pink golf ball. It's got a density of 1.23. So I drop it in here, and where's that going to stop? So it'll go down, 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 down. And then some people want to say it would go halfway in between these two. And this was a liquid, it would. But since it's a solid, it's just going to sit right on top of that blue layer. If that makes sense. So it's going to sit right on top of that blue, maybe dip into a teeny bit. But the idea is what I really care about. Like, okay, do you get that since its density is in between these two, that's where it's going to end up, generally speaking. And then I mentioned intensive. Okay, so again, intensive doesn't mean that density can never change. It just means changing the amount of your stuff won't won't change the density. So for example, let's say the density of my coffee here is 1.05 grams per milliliter. If I go like this and sip some of this coffee, so there's a little bit less in here, the density is still 1.05 grams per milliliter. Okay, so that density doesn't change. Now, if I were to take some of my hand sanitizer, which has a density of like 0.8, and I were to squirt that into my coffee, then the density would change because I'm mixing 2 different things together. So it's not that we can never change the density of the stuff in here, but if we're only changing the amount of coffee in my cup, that won't change the density. So that's what it means for a property to be intensive. It doesn't matter how much of it you have, the property won't change. But if you change what's in there, it will. And we'll talk a lot more about that in the coming weeks. So then we went over any questions people had on worksheet number 1. This answer key is posted on Schoology. And then we did a couple problems from worksheet number 2. So let's see here. Why don't we try... which one of these do I want to do? How about we try... let's try number 2 on worksheet number 2. Okay. So this is, you find a piece of gold with a mass of 528.4 grams. What is its volume if the density of the gold is 19.3 grams per centimeters cubed? So in class, this is what I started off by doing. I wrote down my different variables. So I got density, I got mass, and I got volume. So in this problem, we know that density is 19.3. We know that the mass is 528.4. And the volume is what we don't know. Okay? So I'm going to go ahead and write my density equation. Density equals mass over volume. And so before I even plug any numbers in here, I want to rearrange this equation to get volume by itself. Since I'm solving for volume, that's what I don't know. I want to get volume by itself in this equation before I even do any math. So how do I do that? Well, we need to start by getting volume out of the denominator. So we need to multiply both sides by volume. So I'll cancel out volume here. So this all cancels out. And you're left with this equation. Volume times density equals mass. Okay. But volume's still not by itself. So we can divide both sides by density here. So that way density cancels out. And so we are finally left with volume equals mass over density. Now some of my students will try and memorize that, like, oh yeah, just remember that volume equals mass over density. I really don't recommend that because memorization isn't a very high level of thinking. But this right here, even if you have a hard time remembering something, if you know how to rearrange the equation, you'll always be able to find what you need to do. So I don't recommend memorization here. I really recommend understanding how to rearrange the equation and doing that every time. So volume equals mass over density. So now I'm actually going to plug some numbers in. Okay, so that would mean my mass 528.4 divided by my 19.3. There we go. If I plug that into a calculator, let me see. Got my phonulator here. So 528.4 divided by 19.3 comes out to be 27.378. 27.378. And I'll just stop it there. How many sig figs do I have to have? Well, my mass has 4 sig figs. My density has 3 sig figs. And so my answer has to have exactly 3 sig figs. No more, no less. So that's where I'm going to have to draw the line. So if I were to draw the line here, I'm going to have to draw it after my 3rd sig fig. Okay. So 3 rounded after that. So 27.37 becomes 27.4. And the units on that, well, this is a volume, and it looks like we're dealing with a solid, so we must be using centimeters cubed. There we go. And you can send that to the bank just like that. Final answer. So hopefully this is something you can definitely do. If not, you need to get some good practice in before the quiz on Friday. You also want to make sure you understand the concepts of sinking, floating, how does density affect that. And don't forget, this is important, the density of water is 1.00 grams per milliliter. I will not provide that for you on the quiz, but it will be a key piece of information you need to take down this quiz on Friday. All right? Get to studying, nerds.